Hermitage Dhamma. I'm Ajahn Cunda. It's nice to see people joining, and hope everyone is well. Just enjoying the life at the Hermitage these days. It's been very nice living with my fellow bhikkhus and getting along well and enjoying each other's company. We just had a short Dhamma discussion with each other on a question actually that came on Friday from, I think it's Gabriel, and that was about Dhamma with chaya. So it's a nice engagement one can have with one's fellow practitioners to be able to talk about the Dhamma and in a sincere way around how we can, understand what the Buddha's teachings are and how to bring that into our own practice. The practicalities of what it is that we're trying to do and how to best engage with the mind, which is not always the easiest thing. So it's helpful to have friends along the way who we can ask questions about, and each one of us who's practicing has different nuances or understandings of the Dhamma and what it is we're observing. And at the same time, we all have the universal quality of discontent and happiness, difficulty and ease, the sort of the beautiful aspects that come with practicing and understanding the Buddha's teachings, and also, along that way, we are trying to figure out and sometimes bumble along because it's not always so easy to follow the path. In fact, the Buddha says taming the mind is the hardest thing one can do, more difficult than becoming a world ruler would be to have tamed the mind completely. So it's it's a very good undertaking what we're doing. It's a challenging thing to understand our own minds and try to keep ourselves from getting into trouble. And each of us, I think, are doing our best along this path. And it's unfortunately some of that comes with the baggage of feeling we need to chide ourselves for not being good enough. But that's part of the whole observation that we're trying to examine, to watch that, to watch the inclination of our mind. So I think I will, and also please let me know how my volume is, if it's not high enough. I think it's been pretty much fixed since I moved over to this mic. I can be a bit closer. But kind of getting into that question that Gabriel had around, can you speak on Dhamma with chaya, the investigation of Dhamma, or Dhamma phenomena, and how to do this skillfully so it doesn't fall into thinking about. So this is a very good question. It tends to be a typical question because one of the things that we first observe with our practice is that there can be a mode of just, I'll just follow my breath. I'll follow the experience of watching my body. And then we go along that tact of just like the simplicity of that, because it can be just enjoyable watching. But then we start to see the nuances of what we're experiencing, and difficulties can arise. And if we think that we just watch our breath for 30 years and then we get enlightened and that's it, I suppose there might be a few people like that, but it takes some investigation and understanding of what the Buddha is teaching in order to really see what's coming through that calm and awareness, whatever it is that we're observing within our own experience. So I think one of the if some of you haven't heard of this word Dhamma with chaya, investigation of Dhamma, in a sort of general way, it's just kind of looking at our experience through the lens of the Buddha's teachings, and that would be seeing something through the Four Noble Truths, or it can be through understanding the Satipatthana, or in any way that the Buddha taught, we're analyzing that. The factors of awakening, the 37 Bodhipakkya Dhammas, or the wings to awakening. There are a lot of teachings the Buddha has in order to encourage us to analyze our minds, analyze what the phenomena is or the experiences that we are observing when we're practicing. So for some of us, that can be particularly how something arises for us individually as a person, and it can be sort of our go-to habits, what we're doing, and we just get to know that. Many people in their lives don't have the opportunity to practice the Dhamma, or haven't encountered it, or simply are just up against too many difficulties in their life to be able to practice the Dhamma. So it's not, I think, to be assumed that everyone who encounters the teachings therefore has the way to be able to practice it. And so it's a bit of a privilege, or not a bit, but it is a privilege to be able to have the potential to watch the mind and see the mind and dedicate that to our own experience and our own spiritual path. But when we do have that opportunity, then we want to try to kind of understand what it is that we're watching, what it is we're seeing. And as the Buddha talks about right view, we can understand that through the analysis of the Four Noble Truths. So that would be just seeing distress or discontent, suffering in our experience, and seeing, okay, this is true. What the Buddha said, it is prevalent. All of us do experience this, and then we see why and what the reasons are, and that's just Dhamma Vichaya, just examining that. The question was about how to use it skillfully so it doesn't fall into thinking. And Dhamma Vichaya is a type of thinking. It's a type of way of using the mind. But I believe the question was more along the lines of unskillful thinking, or we can call that papancha. Or there's one sutta, and I don't know the exact quote of it, but the Buddha talks about one who over meditates or under meditates, or meditates in all kinds of different ways, and the adjectives he uses are quite funny, but it sort of describes an obsessive mind, or a mind that's sort of bent on too much movement, or too much moving forward into the meditation, or grasping around it. And we have to be careful about how it is that we're actually meditating. And the only way we can do this is by really investigating and being aware of, like, what it is that we're experiencing this moment. So an investigation of Dhamma is to see as our minds are moving, we can calm down a little bit as we're watching our minds, and then we get to kind of question ourselves, where is this movement that I keep going to? I keep going towards, I gravitate towards this particular memory that I have, or this aversion, or for some of us, we might realize that anger is a prevalent emotion that we experience, or greed, or whatever it might be. It might be shame or embarrassment, which is quite common. Fear is something I spoke about. And that, looking into that and understanding that, is really Dhamma Vichaya. It's kind of examining, for example, how is it suffering? How is fear suffering? How is their stress? How does it arise, possibly on discontent? So this is really how we kind of investigate Dhamma. And to know when we're not doing it skillfully is when the mind, we start to investigate that very result of what it is that we're questioning or trying to understand. And we see, is our kind of questioning leading to more proliferation, more thinking about it? It's kind of going off into possibly doubt, the fifth hindrance. Am I doing this right? Is that right? Am I sure? How do I know if that's actually possible? And we get into kind of questioning ourselves and not being sure. And that just kind of spins us off. So we have to look at kind of the qualities, the wholesome qualities that are arising when we're investigating and when we're looking. And that requires some skill in itself. It's sort of doing Dhamma Vichaya, or investigation of Dhamma, is really a skill that one learns. So try it out. That's how we do things, and then see what arises out of that. You can try very simply, like, where does my mind particularly move? Where does it have its tendencies, its ruts? What does it keep going to? You might have particular memories, and so I would say, if one's investigating something like that, then to get caught up in the story of a memory, or to get caught up in the details of something like that, it's not useful. It just spins the mind off into something that's just a conditioned phenomena, really. To understand also that memory is just fabrication and a creation. And so we don't want to get too caught up in the details of that, but we want to see the flavor of the Dhamma. We want to see how it's leading us towards less dukkha and more insight and more understanding into how really desire is conditioning all of this. And with delusion present, it's hard. It's hard to do that because investigation can be something that isn't so clear to see, or that I've talked about that sense of delusion as something that obscures us, and we can get into our own stories and forget that, oh right, I'm meditating. So I think the answer to Gabriel's question is really looking into whether we are moving into papancha, or proliferation of thought, and to kind of pulling the mind back, say, okay, this is not going in a good direction. So it's sort of getting a litmus test, or just putting in a question to ourselves, like, is there more stress? Is there more anxiety now that I'm kind of thinking about how this works, or how the Dhamma is working in this particular situation, how my mind is moving, or is there more calm and quiet and peace and insight based on that? Insight, I think, always has a quality of letting go. So usually it can come with attachment and grasping, especially when we think we're going to lose it. But real insight is a sense of like, oh, I see, I get it. Now I see what the problem was. And then we have the possibility of letting go from there. But often, as many of you might know, once sort of we gain understanding or insight into our own practice, or how our minds work, there can be kind of a coming out of that, and a whole attachment of I. This is my insight. I had this understanding. I see now how it clearly works. And then we want more of that, or we want to hold on to it, write it down, and keep it. And I find that when there is wisdom that arises, when we see clearly into the Buddha's teaching, or whatever it is we're experiencing, and we grasp after it, that insight almost fades and has less meaning. Whereas if we let it go, it comes back to us. There's a possibility of it being there for us when we need it. So I think that's another tendency to be careful of, is grasping around what it is that our understanding revolves around when we analyze Dhamma. And I don't see any further questions about that, so either people are listening and appreciating that, or they're wondering, what is he talking about? But if there are any further questions about that, let me know how it works for some of you, and possibly some of your own understandings. Another question that came up was how to develop detachment with kind and compassionate people, This was from Sumrit, and he said he struggles with it, knowing that separation from those people due to causes and conditions will bring suffering. And I think this goes a bit in tandem with, like when we have pleasant experiences in our meditation, or whatever it is that we see as kind of wholesome and we want to hold on to. It's not always the case that attachment is wrong, or the wrong movement of mind, or the wrong thing to be doing, because in a way we want to attach ourselves to the wholesome. We want to attach ourselves to what feels right, and if that happens to be particular teachers, then we can utilize that that sort of attachment for others in a way that's beneficial for us. And once we've kind of, I think that's more through like appreciation and gratitude, and how we can really be thankful and appreciate a teacher or someone who has been kind to us or beneficial to us, and once we have a clear relationship with that, and we see that person is very beneficial in our lives, then I think we work on those subtle attachments in ways that won't reverse that quality of admiration, or that quality of continuing to seek them as a source of wisdom. And I think, one can reflect on the fact that we're all aging and dying. We're all kind of brothers and sisters in that, and so are those who are our teachers, our benefactors, and we can kind of work on that in a way to see like, oh yeah, like we're all kind of bound by this same problem, that we're all living, and we're all born, and then we sicken, and we age, and then we die. And so seeing that similarity to those who are our benefactors, it kind of puts it more on a par of understanding and compassion, and also appreciation at the same time. And I think also that that acknowledgement, even in the question that Sumrit asked about separation, just acknowledging that separation is enough to create that sense of detachment, or not being so grasping around those who we care for and those who we love. I think that it's a very normal human condition to grasp around the people who we care about and who are beneficial to us. And it's just a part and parcel of what it is that we do. We have to learn to allow in our own understanding the sense that everything ultimately goes away. All of those people that we love, our parents, our brothers and sisters, spouses, and our children. And then there's that I think just that sense of knowing that is really allows for that sense of detachment, and it brings up more appreciation and gratitude for having these people in our lives. I mentioned a while back this sort of Stoic challenge from the Stoics, who suggested that we actually imagine that sometimes for a short while, not a very long while, not kind of getting into like hours and hours of imagining, a parent or a spouse's death or something like that, but just a few moments of saying, oh, what would the reality be like without this person in my life? And just sitting with that for a moment, be like, okay, that this person who I think is every day that I wake up is there. They've been there every day. There's no reason to think that they're not. This particular teacher, whoever it is, children, what would it be like if I just woke up and they were gone, and there was no reversal of that? It was just, they're gone. They're no longer living. And that is quite a wake-up call. And all that, arises is that wish to tell a person usually like how we care about them and appreciate them and feel gratitude for them in our lives. And it also helps to create a reality that is the truth of our own existence and experience, that we will lose all of these people either through our own death or their dying before us. So I think that's really a bit of how I think one can develop that sort of detachment to kind and compassionate people. But I don't think any of us are really alone in that sense of attachment that we have. But I also would encourage a bit of nurturing around seeking out teachers who one feels really meaningful and important in their life, and not kind of doing the opposite to kind of create that detachment. So that would be I would think that would be a misunderstanding of attaching to a teacher, or detaching to a teacher, is that one should say, well, I won't be in contact with them, and then that'll allow for more detachment. I think if one feels very close to a teacher, then at times it might be helpful to separate, to gain some distance or understanding within oneself around that attachment, but to kind of divorce oneself completely because we see that, I don't think is very helpful. Just to also illustrate that Ajahn Chah would often send his students away, and there are stories of him doing this intentionally, as I understand it, to particular students who were grasping around him too strongly. And so he'd send them to a branch monastery, not just away. He didn't kick them out of the monastery for being too attached to him, but he did suggest they go somewhere else. And there's some funny stories where a couple of students refused, and you weren't really supposed to do that. But the experience of being a monastic is often fairly organic, and unless one is actually like kicked out of a monastery, there's all kinds of ways that people go different places or stay in different places, and it's not really like the rule that people do or do not do certain things like that. So it's not surprising that some students, understanding that, would just be like, well, I'm not going anywhere, I'm just going to stay around. So to work with that, as people do in our practice, going to monasteries and spending time with monastics, with monks and nuns, and learning from them, going to meditation centers and spending time with teachers who are practitioners. These are very good things to be doing, and eventually, I think, one of the paths that one wants to come to is that we need our teachers less and less, that we're able to internalize that teacher, and we're able to actually learn from what they've taught us, and in a way imbibe their teachings within, so that when there is that closeness, there is that sort of very close relationship that has occurred with a teacher, one has the potential to really see their wisdom and incorporate it into one's practice, so that we know the answer to certain questions we'll have. So we can say, these bumper stickers, what would Jesus do? We might say, what would our teacher say? What would our teacher do? What would Ajahn Chah do? Sometimes I'll think, what would Lumpur Pasana do? Or what would Lumpur Viradhammo do? And it's helpful for me often to think, what would Lumpur Sucitto do in this situation or with this particular difficulty? And I have to say, just thinking of these teachers, I don't have to have a specific answer, but just the thought of them arise. Oh yeah, like just their being and what they have taught me over the years. It just kind of, oh right, like maybe I just don't need to make such a big problem out of this in my own mind. This particular story I have, or a person that I have a problem with, And then I think about one of these Kruba Ajahns, these senior, these elder monks, and oh yeah, that's right. This is how they would think about it, or just don't take it so seriously, And it's quite helpful. Yeah. It can add a sense of humor too, because most of the teachers I have had that. They can kind of laugh at certain situations and not take them so seriously. And so just picturing them in my own mind is really helpful. And I think that possibly several of you have done that yourselves. You just imagine your teacher in your own mind, or imagine several teachers or whoever has been beneficial to you in your life, even if it's not like a formal teacher that you have, and you feel joy arise. You can be kind of stuck in some aversive state, and and she said that, and I can't believe that, and I should have said this to her, but then da da da, and he should have just stayed out of it, minded his own business, and oh, poor Suchito, oh yeah, there he is. He's just smiling there. So that's it's just quite a helpful image to have. One of the encouragements around a particular reflection is Buddhanusati. And you can call it a reflection, but it's also just like, a mindfulness of the Buddha, or a sense of being aware of the Buddha, bringing up the Buddha in our minds. And we can do that with the Sangha, with the Dhamma, and all sorts of things. But in terms of reflecting on the Buddha, we can bring up his qualities. Oftentimes, many of us are visual, so we want to have an image of the Buddha, what is that? I mean, I guess it can be helpful for many people to have an actual physical image, but the qualities of the Buddha are amazing to think about, and just how he struggled through many rebirths, how he made a vow that was so strong that went through those many rebirths, how he struggled with asceticism, the incredible compassion he had, how he was able to actually teach the incredible amounts that he was teaching with so many monks and nuns and lay women and laymen, and not to mention devas and gods and all kinds of beings. And it's just it's wondrous, to think about that, that sense of the Buddha, just kind of bringing him in, and even just knowing that there's an enlightened being, we can have a sense, why am I so upset about this situation, or why am I so confused about it? The Buddha wasn't confused. Not to compare ourselves, but just to know, right, there's another state of being where there isn't any confusion, and there isn't any desire to try to get something or to get away from something. So when we have that, it just allows us to have a clear mind. It can be very inspirational. I'd say it's not wholesome to then say, oh, I'm just so pathetic compared to the Buddha. That's not a helpful movement of mine. So just trying to be more aware of how wonderful the Buddha's qualities are, and how we have the potential to bring his qualities into our own lives. And it's a very important part of practice. I know some practitioners that use Buddhanusati as their main object of meditation. And in some ways, we have to try things out. So that's just one way. And so you can do that. Like, that's what sort of the pujas that we do, that's really what we're doing. We're bringing up the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha, or the Dhamma and the qualities of the Dhamma, the Sangha, and on it goes. Any of those reflections are actually something that are helpful to bring up. If one's drowsy, then you can kind of really wake yourself up with a reflection like that. But also when the mind is quiet, it's really good to bring that up. And this would be a sense of also Dhamma Vichaya, reflecting on the Dhamma, reflecting on the teaching. Like, we could ask ourselves, what would it be like if I was enlightened? What would that be like? And the answer is often quite quite helpful, because we say, oh, I wouldn't be struggling with these minor things that I keep bringing up. And then we can almost have a sense of that, what that might be like, to no longer need to defend ourselves, to no longer need to grasp at anything or get anything. And there is such a relief around that. Can also almost bring tears to one's eyes, just that, I don't need to torture myself so much or be so hard on myself or other people. And not as a meaning of, not as a means of chastising, but more of a sense of, oh, right, there is this potential reality or way of being that I can move into. So those are some reflections, I think, that are helpful for people to think about, in terms of either analyzing Dhamma or thinking about teachers and how they can help us, or how we use reflection in our practice. How to notice whether that's gone into thinking. If you're getting more stressed about, any of these things that you're bringing up, then it's not moving in the right direction. So you kind of have to, okay, this is just thinking or worrying or fretting. Or another thing I find that is helpful is encouragement to ourselves. So we need to essentially learn how to speak to ourselves well, that's sort of the kindly speech we're looking at. And it's not just outward speech, it's our inner dialogue as well. And that's where a lot of us have this private sense of who and what we are. We know kind of the ways we talk to ourselves. And I think it's most of us, if we examine that, can see that there's a lot of unskillfulness in that. And so we can learn different ways to speak to ourselves, to encourage ourselves, like, okay, let's move in a better direction, or maybe I can not say this one thing I want to say, or maybe I can sit right now, even though I'm trying to do everything but sit in meditation. Why don't I just stop what I'm doing? Because I don't have to do it right now. Everything in my mind is telling me I have to do this, but it's actually not true. So I'm just going to sit down for 15 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. And so we need that encouragement. We need that kind voice, that friendly voice inside of our heads that we can use, and the voice of the Buddha, or the committee member within our minds that isn't often heard. We try to learn how to accentuate the skillful members of our mind that we often quash with the tyrant. And that is not an understatement. That's a huge part of practice. Really learning how to speak to ourselves. Sometimes we need to also reflect on the voice that we hear within our minds, and we can see sometimes it's quite harsh. It can be quite harsh. I shouldn't have done that. That was so stupid of me. I don't want to ever do that again. I don't want to ever speak to that person again, whatever it might be. And unfortunately, that's a habit of mine that gets reinforced every time we use it. And it's unskillful speech. And so we want to learn to recognize that, because if we're speaking that way to ourselves, it's also coming out towards other people. It's inevitable. Our negative attitudes, or our ways that are not really encouraging us in a positive direction, in a good direction. So I would encourage everyone to really try to bring that up and understand that, to see carefully sometimes how it is we're speaking to ourselves, even just to know the tone. I think that's what Sumana just mentioned, hearing the particular voice and intonation. And I think maybe she was referring to a teacher's voice, but also we can think about our own voice. And sometimes I like to ask myself how I would respond to myself in the future as a wiser person. What is the direction I want to have moved in a particular way, so that I can arise there. So I don't think in that particular sort of more wise condition, I don't think it's always good to think that the future is a banished condition. We should never think about it, or never even have our minds on it, or it's all a fabrication anyway. So it's important to have a sense of what it is we're doing. If we didn't have any future or repercussion of what we're doing, then we get into this whole annihilationistic view. So we have to also be mindful of how we can skillfully use, for example, a thought about the future. And I think one way is to say, where do I want to end up, or what do I want to do? How do I want to be in the future? And if there is a particular way, something that we see as helpful to us, then we can say, okay, then what is it I need to put into my practice? What do I have to do? What are the steps of the path I need to make in order to have that future be fulfilled? So that might be to be enlightened and to not suffer anymore. And I think that's really important, because it's easy to forget that goal, that we're trying not to suffer, and that sometimes we're choosing ways that are causing us to suffer. And in certain ways, I would encourage people to actually think about the future in that way, rather than like doom scrolling or some other way of thinking how bad something is or going to be or what it is, or fretting. It's just a different way of thinking that's more in a skillful direction about the future, rather than what tends to be quite unskillful. The same as with the past. We can utilize our past experiences for the good, but when we're using it to beat ourselves over the head, or we can also aggrandize. We can think about how great we are, and or in ways that are inflated or conceited. So I think there's always a skillful path. There's always a skillful way of how we move our minds, and what it is that we're trying to use in terms of the conditions we have in our lives that can better that situation. Right. So Shelley was talking about not getting attached to outcomes. So I think particularly talking there about political movements, or use the word hearings. So you have to deal with the world in certain ways, and then we are concerned with outcomes, but we don't want to get too attached to them, because then we'll get very disappointed when it doesn't work out our way. Which doesn't mean that we don't try to make an influence in how the world is working, but if we get too attached to it being the way we think it should be, then when it isn't that way, we're just going to suffer. So we have to acknowledge that it might turn out like a complete disaster, and if we're okay with that, then that outcome as a possibility, not with it being good, but then that possibility will allow us to be a lot less detached and concerned and worried when something negative does occur. So Sumrit is asking about a similar question on reflecting on impermanence, and how it can create fear and anxiety at times with respect to passing away of pleasant situations. How to overcome that. I think, Sumit, it's very similar to what I was talking about with the answer to your question when we started how to develop detachment. And essentially you're asking, when something passes away, something pleasant passes away, it's there's dukkha there. We are being separated from what we love. And I think that impermanence is more, when we reflect on impermanence, we see it more as a fact of what it is. Just everything about our experience is impermanent. And as I've mentioned before, Lumpur Cha would talk about impermanence as uncertainty, or not being sure. And we are very afraid of that uncertainty passing. So it's not easy, because our desire is for things to be stable. None of us really want to get old. We do when we're little kids. We can't wait to get older, and then we just want to slow down, but we can't. And we're just aging. All of us are aging, and so in terms of impermanence and reflecting on that, and also its cousin or association, uncertainty and not knowing, we relate to that in terms of our experience of it when we reflect on it. That fear does arise, anxiety does arise, and we don't want, all of us, I think, are mostly want to associate with pleasantness. And as I've said before, sometimes, actually all the time, we want to utilize that pleasantness when it comes to meditation. If meditation was always a dreary, uncomfortable, painful experience for every moment of it, why would we want to meditate? Why would we want to calm the mind? Why would we wouldn't be interested if the outcome was always unpleasant. So of course there is going to be pleasant, but again, it comes to that grasping and attachment that we have to it. So impermanence is a way to kind of, I keep quoting that same quote of, I keep bringing up that same quote of Lumpur Sumedho, "Kiss the joy as it flies by," which is that you acknowledge that joy, you enjoy, it's there, it's pleasant. We don't have to. I mean, the Buddhist path is not to deny pleasant experience, but it's to not be attached to it, to know that it eventually goes away. And so really impermanence and reflecting on impermanence might have on the sort of dark side of it, or the one side of it, fear and anxiety that arises. But then we see like that there's not much to be really afraid of, because whether something is good or bad doesn't have to affect us. We can be with the unpleasant, we can be with the pleasant, we can know that it's just a rising condition, and it's our sense of sati, our mindfulness, that is aware of that condition and that doesn't have to get involved in it. The dukkha is really, why do I have to suffer, and I shouldn't suffer, and it's that attitude we have that's kind of coloring everything, rather than just the pain of being associated with something that's unpleasant. Something that's unpleasant is just unpleasant, isn't it? It can be sometimes overwhelming, that's for sure. We lose someone, or part of our body is, we're in excruciating pain. There's no denying of that. But yet at the same time, there is the potential to be removed from that pain, so that the sense of I getting involved and the sense of wishing for permanence and wanting it to be a different way doesn't have to get so enmeshed in the experience of the unpleasant. And so reflecting on the impermanent is, again, back to this Dhamma vichaya, and say, oh yeah, that's right. Like, I thought this pain was going to be forever, or I thought this difficulty was going to be so painful. We lose someone who we love. We get separated from them, or somebody who we care about ends up hating us. And we say, oh yeah, this is what impermanence is. Why did I think it was anything else? And we also know that we don't have control of it, But some people say, the opposite of love is hate. And sometimes that happens, You can feel, one can care for another person, and then it turns to hate, or they turn to hate towards us, and sometimes that has a lot to do with how we acted. But if we're in denial of that ever happening, then we can suffer. I know there's a woman who was caring for her elderly parents, and her mother was suffering quite a lot, because she was having, I think she had Alzheimer's, and she believed that her husband, who loved her dearly, and they had spent, decades and decades together, was trying to poison her. She became obsessed with that in her mind, and this can sometimes happen. Those that we love can turn on us, and it's not even, it's no fault of hers necessarily. It's just the biology of the mind changes, and then that happens. And so we have the Dhamma to be our refuge, because we can't take refuge in other people. It's just like they could disappear, or even, in a situation like that, we might have to live with them hating us, and we have to try to be compassionate in that sort of situation and deal with it as best we can. I mean, still honor that person, all the goodness that they did have with us, but also be very aware of their very deep suffering in that kind of situation. So we also want to, that comes back originally to the teachers, and when we take refuge in them, there's also not necessarily a pure refuge there either, because a teacher can disrobe or leave, or there can also be falling out. There can be difficulties that occur. So it's we have to be careful of. I think we have to be careful of that attachment that we have as well. I didn't mention that before, but that is a bit of the dark side of, or the difficulty that occur when we do attach to certain people, or we do grow fond of others, or we seek them out as a refuge. Something like that can sadly happen. After being in the robes, this will be almost 14 years. I've been a bhikkhu, this vasa, and I've seen that happen. Where very senior monks have disrobed. I know one monk in particular in Thailand who was in the robes about almost 40 years, and so many people took refuge in this monk, really saw him as their guide, and he was a teacher to perhaps at least hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million people. I mean, he was very well known, and he disrobed after almost 40 years in the robes. And so we have to, how do we deal with that kind of situation? That can really affect our practice. We can really be shaken quite severely. And I think it comes back to that impermanence, that we're not sure. It's not for sure. We can't trust that everything is going to work out all right. And that's where that Stoic challenge comes in. Like, oh, what if this teacher who I took refuge in, who I really seek out and is so meaningful in my life, just disappeared, or they disrobed, or they ended up just kind of going against their own learning, their own teaching, their own path. So we have here, we have our own hearts, and that's our refuges in awareness, our refuges in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and what it is through our own understanding. That's what we can take refuge in. So it's sort of like being aware of the goodness of others, but also being aware that can change. And it's just part of the First Noble Truth, what the Buddha talked about. So I think I'd like to end with a quote that has been fairly meaningful to me. It actually is a Zen quote. I've never found an author for it, but it's a very straightforward understanding of the path and the end of the path. We are here to end suffering. If ending suffering is more important than anything, we will end suffering. If ending suffering is not more important than anything, we will not end suffering. If I am suffering, it is because I am choosing something over ending suffering. We are not here to create and cling to beliefs. We are here to pay attention. We are here to use everything in our experience to see how we cause ourselves to suffer so we can drop that and end suffering. So for those of you who have the time, maybe we can sit for a couple of minutes, and then I'll press a button which will ring a bell, and that'll be the end of the session. So it was nice to be with everyone, and I hope that was a helpful reflection tonight. Wanted to make an announcement, and that is that we're having a garden party here on Saturday, May 1st. So that'll start at 10:30 a.m. and we'll finish at 4 p.m. So we'll have the meal at 11 a.m. and then work in the forest and on the grounds from 1 to 3 p.m. and then we'll have tea from 3 to 4. So that'll be our garden party, and everyone's welcome. We'll still be wearing masks and social distancing, but for anybody who'd like to come, please come on over. All right, and I'll see you, or some of you, Friday morning at 7 a.m. Okay. Have a good evening.